So now officially, I'm very appreciated that you found time to talk to us, Mr. Nix. Hi.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start from the remembrance of one of your interviews that you gave to one of the channels in January. So then you had a lot of predictions of scenario of Russian Federation. And do you see that all the scenarios that you were thinking about came true? And do you see that nowadays, from what's going on, we can ever predict something from what Russia or Putin is going to do in the nearest future?
Well, yes. I mean, I had said early on that there were, great fears of the buildup and invasion of Ukraine. As you know, I worked very closely with John McCain for many, many years. He was the chairman of IRI, and he predicted many years ago that Russia would invade Ukraine even further. So that has all come about, unfortunately. The other prediction that I did make is during the buildup, I predicted that Ukraine would stand fast in this conflict. I was doing a lot of cable news, TV interviews in the States, and I was on with lots of retired US military officials who were all predicting that Kyiv would fall within 24 to 48 hours. And I said, no, it won't. And they asked me why. And I said, well, because I've been to Donbass, I've been to the front, I've been to the Crimean border, and I've talked to the Ukrainian soldiers there. And I came away with the impression that they would stand, they would fight, and they were willing to give their lives for their country. And that's exactly what we're seeing playing out.
Talking about the 24th of February, do you see from the political point of view that after first bomb fell on the ground of Ukraine, all the international agreements, all the groups of negotiations such as Minsk agreement or Normandy group are canceled? So if they're canceled, we are free. So we can hope that we can find another possible agents in this conflict, in this war, to help stop the aggression, stop the war.
Yes, I completely agree. Many of us thought that Minsk was irrelevant during the peace process or the attempts, but the day that the first shell landed made the Minsk agreement completely and utterly irrelevant. So now we'll see how things progress. I have full faith and confidence in the Ukrainian armed forces. I am very gratified that military support has increased. So I'm very confident that this can be a positive outcome for Ukraine in terms of the end of this conflict and whatever negotiations might take place.
So concretely, what countries in what configuration, like it was Germany, France, Russia, and Ukraine, can be this union to stop the aggression? You don't see right now such union.
Well, right now, what I see is a union of Western European countries and the United States assisting Ukraine militarily, assisting Ukraine in the humanitarian sense, and doing whatever it can, that is the Western alliance, to help Ukraine prevail in this conflict. And that's a sense of unity that didn't exist before this war.
Absolutely, definitely. But do you see any potential? You've heard about many attempts of our parts of negotiators from Ukrainian side in Belarus, in Turkey. We were trying. We still hope that something can change the situation in diplomacy. Do you see any potential, whatever potential, in the diplomacy way to speak or to talk to Putin now?
Well, my theory is that if the Ukrainian armed forces continue to prevail in the battlefield and can push Russia back, that will be the deciding factor in any negotiations. So that's why it's so important for the United States and our European allies to arm Ukraine to the extent possible, to put Ukraine in a very strong negotiation position based on what's happening on the battlefield.
You said in one of your interview, again, I'm remembering, in Russian phrase, "ни словом, а делом." So not in words, but in action. This is how Russians or how Putin or Putin regime understands in negotiations, right? So, but obviously, from what we see here in Ukraine, nor of these options is effective for Putin. Not words, not actions. So diplomacy, we see he doesn't want to speak to anybody, and observing how many people from Russia's side dying on our ground doesn't affect him at all. So what else can be used? What tool else can be used? Can you see it?
Well, again, I feel very strongly that continued success on the battlefield by armed forces will force an end to this conflict. I think that's the only way out, which is why, again, arming Ukraine is the singular most important thing we in the West can do right now to force some sort of negotiation at some point when Russia continues to suffer defeat on the battlefield.
You once said that Putin was afraid of democratic society in the Russian Federation. But now, from the point of numbers, people who support Putin's regime in the Russian Federation for now shows that nor him nor his society doesn't want any democratic situation and democratic environments in their country. So what's he afraid of, and what society is afraid of? Russian society, how do you think?
Well, what is Vladimir Putin afraid of? He's deeply, deeply fearful of losing his position of power. That's why he fears so much the integration of countries like Ukraine into Europe, because he feels that if Ukraine and Belarus would become part of Europe, would have and Belarus would have a democratic transition, that the same thing could happen in the Russian Federation, and that he would be out of power. So I think a lot of this is driven by his fears of former Soviet states becoming a part of Europe and demanding the same in Russia.
In any scenario of the end of this conflict, do you see any position of this man, I don't even want to call him by name, in global politics? Because when we see what he's doing during the visits of global politicians, like remember a few days ago, UN Nation Secretary was here and he was bombing, shelling. You remember how Joseph Biden visited Poland and he was bombing Lviv Marshall army parts, showing off what he's thinking about global politicians. After all these crimes, war crimes that are fixed by Western journalists here in Ukraine, after all these things that he already said towards nations, not only Ukrainians, all these things about nuclear weapons that he's all the time trying to show off. Do you think he ever have any political future in this world? Someone from politicians of the world are going to sit down at the table with him?
No, I don't. Vladimir Putin is indifferent to other global politicians. He simply doesn't care. He doesn't really care about his own people. He doesn't have their welfare in mind. Otherwise, he would never have launched this illegal war. Where is this placed in the post-conflict order? My hope is that Ukraine prevails in the battlefield, number one. Number two, that there is ultimately a political transition in the Russian Federation, which causes Vladimir Putin to have a seat in the docket of the criminal court in The Hague. That is what we all should strive for, so that no one will have any contact with him or want to interact with him, except for his defense attorneys.
Do you see really any, I'm not talking about strong, but any opposition in Russian Federation? I'm not talking about the people who are immigrants right now and trying to speak for Russian opposition outside the country. Do you feel really there are any opposition there?
Well, yes, there is definitely, there's data that supports the fact that a certain percentage of Russians do want to see their country move in greater democracy, greater openness, greater human rights. But again, what has happened is there is a fear society that has been imposed on the Russian people. It was there prior to the invasion and only heightened since the invasion. This adoption of the law by the Duma calling for a 15-year prison sentence for speaking out against the war has had a chilling effect on Russian opinion. So people are afraid to talk about the war. They're afraid to oppose the war. But there's a certain percentage of Russians who would like to see a responsible governance in their country, would like to see greater democracy, greater freedom, and greater human rights. So what the West has to do is continue to support and increase the support to the Russian democratic forces. Because under the theory that if Putin has to contend with domestic politics back home, he has less time for foreign interventions, such as he had for years in Donbass, in Crimea, in Syria, in Africa. He simply cannot focus internationally if he has to contend domestically. Therefore, it's important for the West to continue to support the Russian political opposition and to increase that support now more than ever.
It's a long way to go, as I understand. But for now, the world is afraid of nuclear attack. Do you see these threats? And who from the environment of Putin can stop him? Or for whom you bet? I mean, oligarchs, maybe people from secret services. Is there any guarantee that there are normal people around him that can predict this tragedy?
It's so difficult to predict. I have my own personal assessment. I assess that the threat of nuclear intervention is a bluff, and primarily because Putin is losing the war. He's panicking and making these threats. So again, I would assess that these are not real and serious threats. I certainly hope not, but that's my initial assessment. But again, no one knows what's going on the mind of this particular individual.
How do you see the role of Belarus and Moldova now? Because we see that he's spreading his threats towards the border of Moldova. He's trying to add the conflict to these borders, and the army of Belarus that are still standing on our borders and are ready to break through the border and start to war against Ukraine. Is it possible scenario, or Moldova and Belarus are not gonna follow his plans?
At this point in time, there's no indication that Belarusian forces will actually enter this conflict. And that's especially important now since the offensive from the north towards Kyiv has failed. The Russian troops have been reordered and repositioned. I don't see Belarus making any unilateral moves against Ukraine from the north. But more importantly, the war, I think, has transformed both the Belarusian people, but also the Belarus democratic opposition. Heretofore, the Tikhanovskaya movement and the other democratic leaders did not run a presidential election campaign or a post-election movement that was inherently anti-Russian or anti-Putin. They were very careful to try to maintain and posture good ties with both Europe and Russia. That's completely changed now as a result of the war. So you see Tikhanovskaya, Latushka, Babarika, all of the leaders of these various movements changing their message and have created actually an anti-war coalition. So it's completely changed the rhetoric and the style of the Belarus opposition because they believe that these anti-war messages will resonate with the people in Belarus. We think so too, so we are encouraging them and helping them to create such messages and to transmit them into the country. So it's rapidly changing the situation in Belarus. With regard to Moldova, again, we all know that should Odessa ever fall, that would be the end of Chisinau and the Moldovan country as it stands now. However, we're encouraged by the fact that Russia seems to be rethinking an amphibious assault on Odessa. We've seen rocket attacks. We more of that. But again, we believe that the Ukrainian forces can stand fast and repel any Russian move on Odessa.
Whatever we are, but still we need more and more help from from Western countries in the way of the weapons, and we have motivation, we have power, we know what we fight for, but still we need your help as much as it's possible from all the countries.
Well, here's what IRI has been doing since the conflict started. In the last 5 weeks, we have brought 3 separate delegations of Ukrainians, primarily MPs, members of the Verkhovna Rada, but also civil society actors. And what we're doing is scheduling meetings for them in Congress, at the State Department, and other places in the executive branch, elevating Ukraine's voice in our Congress to help them make the argument for additional military and humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. We plan to bring another MP delegation in May for the John McCain annual Freedom event. IRI will be honoring the people of Ukraine, and we will have a group of members of the Verkhovna Rada present to accept that award on behalf of the Ukrainian people. After that, we plan to bring another delegation in May, which we hope will consist of veterans. These are all women that we are bringing, as you are well aware. Men simply can't travel, but these have been very strong, very resilient Ukrainian women making the case for assistance for their country. And I think that they've been successful. You've seen the changes over the last 5 weeks, and more assistance is coming. You saw that President Biden has requested from our Congress a package of $33 billion in assistance to Ukraine, $20 billion for military assistance, $10 billion for reconstruction, and another $2 to $3 billion for humanitarian assistance. That is a huge, momentous package of assistance, and an indicator that the United States is going to stand with Ukraine and help Ukraine prevail in this fight. Secretary Austin had 2 important messages when he traveled to Ukraine to meet with President Zelensky. The first message was that we are going to win. We are going to help Ukraine win. It was consistent with Ronald Reagan's message during the Cold War when he said, our objective is we win, they lose. That's exactly the message Austin was trying to transmit to the Russian Federation. The second important thing he said was, this conflict is beyond Ukraine. It involves and includes all of us, Europe and the United States and our other partners. Another extremely important message, a message of unity of purpose, and also the fact that the West will stand with Ukraine in this conflict. So the messaging is right. The United States has set a goal that Ukraine will win this war. So I'm very confident that will be the ultimate outcome, because the United States is determined for this to become fact.
We are, with our governments, with our people, very thankful for all your help. But as you said, reconstruction, but before the reconstruction, we have to still stand still and resist. And we understand that there are going to be not only safety, defense, political problems, but economical problems and economical crash in our country. And we understand that now what's going on in the eastern part of Ukraine brings to the very deep, tragic humanitarian disaster, because there can be a real hunger on these territories as long as they are occupied by Russians. We understand that we need to help them too. And when it is said that we will have to, our economical situation here in Ukraine affects all the world, and we see it already, especially in African countries. So with this problem, hopefully we will have the help of Western world too, right?
Well, I can only tell you what our strategy is. Right now, we're bringing delegations to Ukraine to ask for military assistance. whenever this conflict is over, we will continue to bring delegations here, but they will be coming to ask for a different type of assistance, and that's the reconstruction of Ukraine, the remont, dealing with the humanitarian crisis of IDPs, of refugees that want to return. This is a huge effort, and it will take a tremendous amount of finansovania, financial assistance. So we're already planning ahead. So whenever this conflict ends, then we will continue to bring Ukrainian delegations to ask for this type of assistance. We think this is the best way that we can help Ukraine. So we're dedicated to a continuation. We think this is going to be a long-term effort.
And a few more questions, if you please. Talking about global politics and the place of Ukraine in global world and global politics after our victory, that I'm sure of 200%, with your help too. Where do you see Ukraine? Because before all this tragical months, Ukraine, we cannot say that Ukraine was subject, mostly it was object of global politics. So where do you see Ukraine after all of this?
Well, I can tell you the world sees Ukraine in a certain way. Ukraine has earned the respect of the international community, the admiration of the international community, because they are defying all odds and defending their country and winning the battle against the great Russian army. So it has drawn the respect and admiration of the world. People are seeing that Ukraine is teaching the world how to fight Russians. And the second thing is that the world has been inspired by the leadership displayed by President Zelensky. He has been a tremendous leader, communicator, lots of comparisons on between him and President Reagan because of their backgrounds, that they're able to effectively communicate with their constituents, with their people. But Zelensky's leadership has gone beyond that. I think the world sees him as a true leader. So I think this is going to transform Ukraine's reputation dramatically. It already has. So Ukraine is showing what it can do. Its leaders are showing what Ukraine can do. And this is going to increase Ukraine's standing in the world.
And talking about global organizations that were trying to rule peaceful movements around the world and showed actually soft power. Maybe you're not agree or you agree with me, but what do you think will be with United Nations, G20, J7, and other different organizations that were really showed that they're quite weak in this war and in this period of our history. So do you think that they all need to be reconstructed like League of Nations before previous World War?
Well, I think many of us have criticisms of the shortcomings on display at the United Nations and other multilateral organizations. My message to the UN and these other organizations is the same as you alluded to previously. Ni slovom, a делом. Words are not enough. The United Nations has to play a greater role, particularly now when Ukraine begins the reconstruction of its country after this conflict. The United Nations has to be a leader in this effort to repair, restructure this country that's been so badly damaged in some areas. So yes, we all have our criticism of the UN, but they have a chance to prove themselves and heavily engage in the reconstruction of Ukraine post-conflict.
And I'm not wanting to criticize, but I will just operate with facts. Lately, I found out how many percent of weapons that were given to Russia during last 5 or 6 years, and mostly it was received from Germany and France. And it's surprising because at the same time, these countries were our negotiators in a Normandy negotiation group. So talking about politics of the world, is this war teach them something that they cannot be on both parts at once? Will the situation change?
Well, I'm unaware of those statistics that you have cited about arms from those two particular countries. All I can say is that we need to see more from France and Germany, both in the form of sanctions and definitely in the form of the purchase and consumption of Russian energy. It's irresponsible for these two Western countries to continue to finance Putin's war against Ukraine, which they are doing on a daily basis with the purchase of Russian oil and gas. It has to stop. So we will continue to press our German and French partners to cease the purchasing of energy from Russia and fueling this horrific, terrible war against the Ukrainian people.
And my last question, through the historical context, what the main mistakes were made by global politicians or global actors of these processes that bring Ukraine in the full tragic war? What do you think? Starting from Crimea, maybe, starting from annexing Crimea.
Yes, I'll go back to 2015. And John McCain predicted this, that the West should have acted more decisively in Donbass and in the Crimean situation. The West did not. It stood by and allowed this to happen. John McCain said, if we allow this to stand, Russia will push further. It will invade Ukraine further. And he was right. The West made a terrible mistake in not stopping Putin's aggression back in 2015. Again, meeting with people in Ukraine warned us, warned the West, right now we are fighting Putin in Russia. If you don't help us now to stop him, eventually you will be fighting Putin. And I think that's very prophetic, which is why we have a second chance to get it right. We have to stop Putin this time and end this all.
Will we ever get back our Crimea? How do you think?
I'm an optimist. I hope that that happens. I know the Ukrainian people want to have that happen. So let's back Ukraine. Let's win this war, and perhaps we can get Crimea back.
With your help, we will still resist in this war. Thank you very much.
Ми з вами. Ми з вами.
Дякую. Слава Україні.
Героям слава. Дуже вам
дякую вам. Так, дякую.
Окей. Всього доброго. До побачення.